Welcome to PM Express Business Edition. Already businesses, enterprises and firms have their 2023 strategy in place. But in the midst of economic uncertainty and the almighty debt exchange program, how do you get it right when it comes to implementation, absorb the shocks and ensure that you survive these turbulent times? Well, on PM Express Business Edition, we're engaging a strategist, a senior lawyer in the legal system, executive chairman of AB and David, and also an economist as well, to get his thoughts on how do you manage these times as a business person, as a multinational, as an SME, and you survive in the system in these times. Mr. David Ofosudote, thank you so much for your time, and I appreciate so much. A lot of things on the table, but you still made some quality time for us to have our discussion on businesses and how they are faring and how they could survive the system. But how are you as a person also doing? It's been a long time.
Yeah, I'm managing, as we say in Ghana, which means you are surviving, just keeping your head above the waters. Yeah.
How interesting has it been for you in terms of the environment? I mean, you've seen these things before, but is it different? Or listen, it is one of those things.
I will not say it's one of those things. It's different. I mean, we've gone through this cycle several times, and I don't know if you listened to the Constitutional Day lecture I gave recently. I talked about similar examples in the past. We actually did go through a haircut in 2015. A lot of people forget that.
Someone was drawing my attention that there's been something like that.
But that haircut was a haircut that only the banks faced. I don't remember the figure. I think it was about 3% or so, that the government negotiated with the banks to take a haircut on the bonds that were held by the banks. But this one is quite pervasive. Not only is it affecting non-banking institutions, also it is affecting individuals. Previously not affecting individuals, but now affecting individuals. And of course, even if you don't add quote and unquote the individuals, a lot of individuals have savings in collective investment schemes. They bought bonds through banks, and all these things. So it's quite pervasive. And also it's for the first time that it is almost coming on the back of a bankruptcy. I mean, just put it simply, because we just can't pay our debt, both local and foreign. And more importantly, you are having a zero coupon this year. You basically are not earning any interest throughout. So this is quite pervasive and quite different.
I mean, I'll come back to the definition. You being a legal person, whether indeed it can be qualified as bankruptcy when you have a debt exchange program. But for most businesses that are formalized, or let's say, let me use this expression carefully, any serious business has already planned for this year. Let's start first with the small enterprises. How do you implement that strategy in the midst of an environment where you don't even know how this whole IMF program would go, because it is, I mean, it's based on something before this deal can be closed. The global uncertainty, I mean, of course, you cannot forget about the Russian-Ukraine war, the geopolitics that are going on and all the rest. How do you get it right in the midst of this uncertainty?
I think we have to look at it not from the point of view of exactly what is going on. If you are implementing a business program, or if you are implementing your strategy, which is what your question is about, you should be looking at it from the point of view of your strategy first, more than what is going on. What is going on impacts on it. But you need to first go back to your strategy. So if your question is about implementation, the first issue is whether or not you have a strategy in the first place. Because if you don't have one, you cannot be implementing that which you don't have. So I'm assuming businesses do have it. Some don't. If you don't, then you are going to have.
But that's serious. Even if it's a small business, you should have a plan that.
Yes, but not all of them do have. Not many people actually have a plan or a strategy that they implement. Some just go, I mean, by the day. I mean, let's take businesses.
Here as you go, obey the wind.
Well, there are some businesses, for example, whose business they plan around what government does. I was on a platform recently consisting of businessmen and CEOs, and I was quite surprised to find one CEO waiting for certain policies of government before he finalizes his plan. I think differently when it comes to that. So if you do have a strategy, I assume that your strategy will be either long-term or short-term. Generally, I prefer the approach where you have a vision for the long term. 5 years, the average business will do 5 years. And where you have a strategy that is coterminous with it. My approach to strategy lately is that because of the way things change so frequently, it is better to have a medium-term strategy cycle than a long-term strategy cycle. So my strategy cycle I recommend is 3 years and not 5 years. Whilst the vision will be 5 years. And then I do recommend short-term tactical planning, which is different from strategy. The tactical planning is what you are doing by the day, which is the one which reacts to the things happening around you. So if you, let's say you do have a strategy and you are lucky enough, for some people the debt exchange will be good. For some people. And not just like COVID. For some people benefited from it. Except that the number of people who will benefit from this may be very, very small again. And it will still be very annoying for those who are, the majority of the people are the ones who it's annoying, right? Now, if you are benefiting from any government or any policy or any change, you are having a tailwind and it's pushing you. But if you are not benefiting from it, it's a headwind and therefore you are facing a stop. But it's all based on the strategy that you do have and that you are implementing. So the first point is that you must have one. If you don't have one, then you are going to be thrown all over the place. If you do have one, then you check whether or not any of these things happening requires adjustments in your strategy, which I believe for 99% of companies in this country, the answer will be yes. You have to adjust your strategy or your business plan for the year because this is quite unexpected and there has been enough policy inconsistency that requires you to make such adjustments. So in implementing it, that will be the first scope of things I will be recommending that people do look at.
Do you think that even again, and looking at what is happening right now as well, doesn't make nonsense of planning and strategizing? Because, I mean, one can talk about even still trying to bring it home, not the external environment, even the local currency. We'll be looking more detailed into that one. Today is this, tomorrow is that. And even now, even though we've got a staff level agreement, some are still saying that you still don't know what is going to happen tomorrow. And opening an environment where there's so much uncertainty.
I think
some
businesses...
That, do you really have to plan?
I think businesses shouldn't behave like that. They will be behaving like governments if they behave like that. I don't think a business plan should depend on so much only of the external environment. A typical strategy or business plan will do either a SWOT analysis or you may do a PESTEL. So let's assume that you did your strengths and weaknesses and you did it before this happened. If you are somebody who actually also looked at the opportunities and threats, by last year, you should have known by now that there were enough threats in the system coming from the external environment. I had occasion to address a group of businessmen in January last year, 2022. And one of the questions that I was asked during the question time, and I was talking about strategy anyway, and then one of the questions I was asked is whether I envisaged that we will go to IMF. It was at that time that the minister said we won't go to IMF. And my answer was that I would be surprised if we were not at IMF by October. I was very certain in my mind that we would be at IMF. I mean, the reason is very simple. The science is a cycle, and a good business strategist should always be watching the cycle. The cycle that we were going to go to IMF was so clear. So I don't know what was the alternative that made the government say we won't go to IMF. So for those for whom I help with strategy, I did not just recommend planning that there will be austerity for IMF. I predicted that we will go. But you also have to drill down to realize that the IMF has changed this approach. It is not so much of austere policies imposed on you, but homegrown policies that you have to come with. So these things affected it. So my point is, you don't have to abandon your plan or your implementation just because these things are happening. You rather adjust it. And indeed, it is what is happening, which is the more reason why you should actually be following your plan.
I ask this question because let's just say that there's a company that depended maybe solely on returns on their investments and maybe bonds even to meet maybe the needs of their staff, expansion, because they've heavily invested.
That will be a company mainly in the financial sector. And they have a totally different regime. Remember, in the financial sector, and to a large extent, the insurance companies, of course, who are also financial sector, the regulator requires them, through prudential principles, to invest in safe securities and safe instruments. And for the first time, our instruments have not been safe or have proved not to be safe. So they are taking a hit. I chair the investment subsidiary of a bank, and we have quite a number of funds under management. And a significant percentage of our funds under management are sitting in bonds. By the nature of the regulation, that's what we do. Even if it's a balanced fund, a significant portion must sit in government instruments. So when that part goes, that really affects your business. And to that extent, I agree with you that if your business will generally depend on government, and I hope that it doesn't get worse than it has already gotten to, maybe you return to that topic. But having said that, other than that, I assume a large number of other businesses depend more on other type of customers than customers who put money instruments with them. And for those type of businesses, they need a bit more adjustments than, I shouldn't say done, they need a bit more adjustments to adjust to the time. And they won't take the same hit the way the banks are going to take the hits, or individuals are going to take the hits. The other challenge will be the individuals whose savings is what enable them live, and also, especially take pensioners, who may actually be investing in the economy post-pension. And if they are affected, then it becomes very, very difficult for them, not only for daily survival, but even for them to continue earning a living. So it's a serious matter. All the point I'm trying to make is that it is important that we don't abandon our plans and strategies just because of that, because that will be giving up hope. And that's the way I would recommend anybody goes.
Let's look at a typical business in terms of implementing that strategy that was looking at expansion, and not any aggressive expansion. Maybe this business was just maybe around East Legon, and now it's growing. I want to move to airport. I want to move to cantonment and all the rest.
Yeah, I want to employ more people.
More people and all the rest. In implementing this strategy, some are saying that what is happening right now, where there will be impact on disposable incomes and all the rest, that plan is gone, thrown into the water.
Yes, it is gone. So, first, I think we shouldn't mix two things up. There's a difference between strategy and action. So the plan, the strategy, etc., must stay. And there must be a business continuity component. So if it's a business continuity component, you should be asking questions. What if? This is an outlier situation. I don't think anybody will have envisaged that you have a situation where if my savings I was going to the cost to, I can't even have it. So the question of whether businesses are going to be able to expand as a result of this, I will look at it from two angles. Most businesses don't expand using returns on bonds. Most businesses don't, except the financial sector. So I've already explained that. Businesses expand using loans and debt instruments or other corporate finance instruments that, they take. The challenge is that the banks are going to have liquidity problems. So you still will not be able to do that expansion because the banks will not be giving you the money. Or the cost of that borrowing will be so outrageous that you will not be able to make returns on it. So definitely expansion programs are going to be very, very difficult, except for few businesses who have other sources of income where it is so, as it were, inelastic that they will still be constantly having a stream of income. But even that, to borrow is going to be very difficult. So for expansion, it's going to be difficult. And if you reduce it to GDP terms, clearly you will realize that the government's own expectation of GDP is not that bullish. Because if businesses are not growing and expanding, then we are going to have a situation where we are going to contract. There will be some growth, but I don't expect very bullish growth.
In implementing this strategy, action, and maybe actualizing this strategy and plan for this year, what do you do with the people, and the people? Some companies are saying, listen, it's always sometimes the employees are the biggest casualty. Anytime there's a restructuring, you want to touch the people first. What do you do with the people?
I think you have to look at it from the way companies and company expenditure are structured, or any business expenditure is structured. Some people just divide it into three. Generally, when the component that you spend on staff cost, and don't just limit staff cost to the amount of salary you pay staff, because staff cost will include the other indirect benefits that staff get. So, for example, if I pay you 100 cedis, that will mean that the actual 100 cedis, which the net you receive, will include also that which is part of your income, which may be the PAYE I have paid to the government, the social security, my component and your component, all that. You go to hospital and all those things. So the total cost to the employer may be about 120 cedis. Yes, I'm just using a ballpark figure. Now, that component, the total staff cost, is generally about a third or less. And then you have administration and all other costs being about a third. Ideal business should have that structure, and therefore the third will go to profits, out of which you pay tax, and then there will be the distribution to shareholders. Of course, it doesn't follow this line, especially for SMEs. But the moment your income cost or your staff cost to employees crosses more than 30, which is a situation for more than 60% of Ghanaian businesses from my experience, you are running into a problem. Now, if you have a situation where people are not spending, a lot of people are not buying, and you are maintaining the same amount of staff, your staff cost is going to go up as a proportion of your total income. That's very obvious. So yes, the people. I don't expect many people to increase employment, one. I expect some to reduce employment, which will then create more problems for the country in terms of unemployment. And people to then find all kinds of ways of reducing their expenditure. So it's going to make quite a lot of challenges for the companies, because employees are going to go home to some extent. You have situations, even the employees who are working are also confronted with the increase in inflation. The last time I checked, it was around 45 or so percent. And therefore, their cost is going up. They are struggling to come to the office. If you look at the consumer price index, the amount they spend on transportation is quite high. Their rent may be going high, but you are not able to increase their salaries. That's the kind of situation that we face. So, again, the stress of employees, and then the stress on the employer or the managers, who are a lot of these middle class people who have savings in bonds and treasury bills, who are not now facing the challenges of managing their employees, but also their personal life, where they are not getting return on their own investments. It's going to be a stressful time.
Let me put you on the spot here. You are a CEO of a company.
I'm not a CEO. Oh. I'm a senior partner. I handed over as CEO, which takes me to a point I need to correct. You describe me as an economist. Well, I'm a transportation economist. I talk a lot about economy, so I studied transportation economics, but I'm not a practicing economist. So,
But let me put you in a context of an owner of a business, and not even as a partner here. How are you going to deal with the people with all these challenges, the bitter truth, the bitter action that you have to take in 2023?
That's painful. We, as a rule, work on our strategy 3 months before the end of the year, and we work on strategy cycles. So incidentally, we happen to be beginning a new strategy cycle, which is going to be 2023 to 2025. It's a 3-year strategy cycle, and for the first time, we are taking a very, very critical look at the number of employees. We had an expansion in terms of number of employees last year because of expanding growth in the economy, but of our clients actually. But we are doing a projection and looking at whether the ability to sustain that number of employees or to increase it is likely to occur. The good thing about some businesses also is if they have other sources of income outside the one in Ghana, then it affects, you look at what adjustments do you make? Do you make adjustments outside Ghana? Do you make adjustments within Ghana, etc.? But the point blank question you put me is whether we are going to do retrenchment as an example. I mean,
not this campaign, just scenarios that if you are faced with all these challenges, some have said that there's always been an easier and escape route for most businesses. That yes, you can touch the staff.
I will look at the number.
So for you, do you think that with all these challenges, a downsizing is a prudent action to
not necessarily so. I will look at the number, and I gave you the percentages. If my percentage of remuneration or staff cost is above 35% of my total, I will make a decision on that. But there are ways to cut. If I can consciously cut cost of administration, I'll cut that rather than let employees go. If I can cut the net profit that I make, I will cut that and rather let employees go. Because you'll be adding more to the social problem, and as a Ghanaian or as an African, you need to take that factor into account. That's one thing I will take into account. Two, it will be important for me to also understand that the staff have to be, as it were, talked to regarding productivity and the ability to make sure that they produce to the level that we can earn other sources of income, especially non-government dependent income. So I would rather retain staff than let staff go. The issue of letting staff go is often the easier route, and I agree. But if you look at it, within a certain period, if the economy recovers, then getting them back is a more of a larger cost. So look at your entire strategy. Are there ways you can maintain staff? I would not recommend that as the first point of call. What I would definitely recommend is that be very careful about increasing staff, because I think there is too much uncertainty in the system.
So let the layoffs be the last action.
Yes, at least
after other things have been
in
considered.
any crisis, your first point is to maintain the status quo and make sure you don't deteriorate, which is the reason why I say I will maintain staff first. And then you see whether you can survive the crisis, and then whether you can now take advantage of the crisis and grow. So at least for the first 6 months, you should be very calm, look at what you can do, and always have a time frame. If you have to let staff go, remember by regulation you need a minimum of 3 months notice to let them go if you are doing retrenchment. So it's always better to have that kind of buffer, which is why it's really painful that companies which recourse to government bonds may not have access to their bonds or the returns on it.
This is PM Express, and I'll be coming back. I'll be getting your thoughts on this whole debt exchange program itself and other developments as well. This is PM Express Business Edition as we look at implementing that 2023 business strategy and plan. How will the current economic uncertainty in the debt exchange program affect this plan? They throw it out of gear, or maybe you still have to survive. We take a short break, and we will be right back. Welcome back to PM Express Business Edition. Let's look at how enterprises, businesses, should be implementing their strategy, actions, and plan for this year. And in the midst of, some would say, an economic uncertainty and this debt exchange program, and how is that going to influence the strategy of yours? I'm talking to a transport economist, a partner at ABM David, and also somebody who's into strategy as well. Mr. David Ofosudote, thank you so much for your time. And speaking as a lawyer yourself, as somebody who appreciates the business landscape, a finance person as well, what is your, let me first the personal thought and also the business and the legal thought as well, and help me out on this. The debt exchange program. Let me get your personal thought first.
I think the elite tend to make simple things complex. I mean, and I always say this, you should be able to explain things in a way that we all understand it. If I were, as a company, right, if I cannot pay my debts as they arise, or if the amount of my liabilities are bigger than my assets, then I'm bankrupt. It's as simple as that. That's how the law.
Do you think government is bankrupt? They are saying that.
That's how the law defines it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I cannot see anything other than bankruptcy. And let me explain why. GDP is the total number of assets or income that we all produce, right? I mean, forget about the argument between GDP and GNP and all the rest. That's for another day. The total amount of money we all generate, can it meet our debts according to IMF and World Bank is over 100%? In other words, we don't have enough to be able to pay what we owe. So maybe you can find a lighter word for it, but for me, it means we are maybe insolvent. I don't know whether that's a lesser word than bankruptcy, but at least we can't meet our expenditure as it occurs. That's all that's
bankruptcy. How do you also define deferred payment as well? Because some want to play on the technicalities and all the rest.
I really try not to do. If you've noted, when I'm advising clients, I do technicalities. When I am talking on a forum like this, I don't do technicalities. Your audience are not just only technical people. Can you pay your debt? Because you owe George Wiafe. George Wiafe bought a bond, 1 million Ghana cedis or 100, or he has a collective investment scheme which has been placed with you. Judge Wiafe comes and says, I want my money, can you pay? No. Even if you defer it for 2 weeks, you couldn't pay it when it was due. How you define that bankrupt, insolvent, unable to pay, etc. That is what it is. You just can't pay. Or if I totaled all the money that George has and I total all the money George owes, does George have more money than he owes? The answer is no. He owes more than he has. And if George's name is changed to Ghana, then that's what it is. George is unable to pay. So don't let's try to deferred simply means I came to you and said I can't pay you today, I can pay you tomorrow. They are one of two things. Either I have it today and I'm refusing to pay, and therefore I want to use the money to enjoy it till I pay you, or I actually don't have it. In this case, we don't have it, because if we had it, we wouldn't be going to IMF to go and look for the money to even survive. So that's the situation. And from every angle, I think it's not a very nice thing. I don't think the government itself thinks it's a nice thing. No government will want to believe that failing to pay people what is due them is nice. So I think it's not a nice thing for everybody, and we have to face the reality. As to the attitude to it, people take different attitudes, but I think the majority of the people are not happy with what is happening. And over the last couple of days, if you've noticed, so many people trying to rally people around to either take the government on or go to court, or it's happening. I see WhatsApp platforms where people say, send your number here. People have set up WhatsApp groups. I've seen somebody I know very well did a very passionate interview on your radio station, and said things which were quite pathetic. I found it very difficult listening to that program. He's somebody I know very, very well. I've known him for many, many years. I found it very difficult listening to his interview. And then yesterday also, I think Senor Hosi also held a session, and some pensioners have spoken. So, George, this is not nice for anybody.
If you put on the legal code as well, and the finance code as well, would you describe this as a necessary evil?
It's evil, but not necessary. I don't want to add a necessary evil. Simply means that which we can't do anything about. I think probably we haven't really looked at how we can do at it from a point of view of talking to everybody who matter in this. I think it's important that individual holders be heard. It looks like a program which came from the government side to the other side, and that's why many people are complaining. At the last time I checked, not many people are signed onto the debt exchange program, which shows a sign of protest. And if it's not properly handled, it can have other ramifications. So I look at it from that ordinary Ghanaian perspective, and the worse it gets for businesses, and the worse it gets for my business and for my individual survival. So it's quite important that we handle it well. Let me give you an example which maybe a couple of people have heard them talk about, but probably it's not been explored. Let's take the institutional holders. Let's assume that you had some corporate entities which are SOEs, which can be operated in a way that they can have return on capital. Let's assume government wanted to divest itself of it. I did hear the Minister for Public Enterprises, if I got his title right, say that 17 enterprises are going to be divested. Is it possible, for example, to call George Wiafe Limited and say, I owe you this amount, will you take this company which I have valued instead of me deferring your payment? In that case, you manage that company and get some returns. At least you own a company, right? Because at the moment, the secondary market is virtually dead. And therefore, if you have an instrument you wanted to discount it, you are not likely to get a buyer for it. But some people, not many, but some people may be ready to take a government asset and say that I will manage this asset, or I will save this asset to 2030 or 2035, and I will find a way of making my own instrument of it. In which case, you don't owe them anymore. And in which case, some of these assets, which are real liabilities sitting on government books, will leave your books. The point is, government has that liability of those state assets anyway, and continuing to hold them on government books itself is putting liabilities on you. If you underwrote those liabilities and ring-fenced it for government and gave it out to people who you owe, who you cannot pay, first you take away the debts that you owe, which you are trying to defer, and then you have the situation where you don't continue that liability in the SOE. So that's another way that government may be able to look at it.
But what do you tell those who might argue that can government engage everyone? Maybe they can do that through these institutional investors and banks.
That is the more reason why those who are trying to represent people as a class is an interesting development which had not been envisaged. And let's all face it, this has not happened before. So maybe it's new to everybody. So yesterday, I think Edouard and the entry, if my information is right, who is a former Director General of the Security Commission. So his personality and his, as it were, he's not an ordinary man you can write off. If my information is right, he did speak on behalf of pensioners. And so if a group of people begin to negotiate on behalf of a class, then at least the government now has the chance to meet people who are a class. Because the class the government has been meeting are the financial institutions, the banks, the fund managers, etc. And remember, I've told you that I sit on the board of a fund management subsidiary of a financial institution. So in such cases, we have had the chance to be able to interact with government. Okay. But for individuals who have not had the chance, the group and the class thing is okay. At least they feel heard.
Do you think that the problem has to do with communication, and that is where we've had all these challenge, or what?
Maybe the communication is more the non-verbal communication than the verbal. Yeah. So at times communication can be non-verbal, so people tend to interpret. And at times also the inconsistency. So for example, individual bondholders were not part initially, then they become part. Pensions were part and pensions are not part, etc. So it makes it difficult to predict, etc. But again, it's just a sign of the challenges we are facing and our government is trying to manage.
You think that the more, and I've had people who argue that the more this thing delays, time is of an essence, the more rather things could worsen for us, because you are racing against time to get a fund program. And I'll be coming to you on that one, since you predicted that before. And the more it delays, the more it's actually worsening.
I don't really think our fund program, and again, I'm not a government spokesperson, I'm just a public-spirited individual who looks at what is happening. I feel free to comment about it. I don't think our fund program should be in danger. I don't think so. Remember, I said that IMF appears to have shifted from its policy of imposing conditionalities on you to asking you to come with your own proposals. I would like to think that the debt exchange as part of the IMF negotiations is a proposal from government and not an IMF conditionality. I would definitely like to think that. I mean, notwithstanding whatever you feel about IMF, I think they do have a human face. So I believe that it is more of a government program, and which is why if people engage government and government decides to amend this policy, they will go back to the IMF. I don't think the IMF program is at a risk. In any event, just remember, notwithstanding that we didn't sign the debt suspension account last year, IMF has just announced that they are actually talking to our external creditors to suspend or forgive some of us. So if the IMF program was at a risk, we wouldn't be hearing those signs. I think that's a very far-fetched argument.
I want you to put on the legal jacket again. What would be your advice to these bondholders at a time that we're also hearing that there's a clause in all these things that has immune government from all these things? I mean, as an independent lawyer, what is the advice to
you know?
If I hold a bond, trying to be practical here, what is the advice?
Lawyers don't give advice on TV.
Yeah. Okay.
like this, and also don't give such advice. I mean, in the manner that you're asking. Because you have to take a specific context into account. But speaking generally as an individual and as a lawyer, of course, I think human beings do have a right. And I think they have the freedom to access the courts if they feel that their rights have been infringed upon. We should not confuse it with certain people who think that if you go to court, you will lose or there will be nothing to attach because government's common fund the consolidated fund, not the common fund, consolidated fund and all those things are ring-fenced. Because having a legal victory or loss is different from your ability to execute it, right? And therefore, I will not make any statement whatsoever that tells any individual that no, it's a time wasting going to court. I've heard people say that.
Yeah.
I totally disagree with them.
Utility.
I totally disagree with them. Because it is a question of you are prejudging what the judges will do.
Yeah.
I mean,
isn't that the reality? Some will say that, listen.
But it's a very, very dangerous proposition we must avoid. I am okay if people take the advantage that, okay, I'm a lawyer or I'm a group of lawyers, I want to negotiate on behalf of a class. Yes. But society, which is in this economic crisis, should avoid a situation where individuals are made to feel that they don't even have a legal right or that they cannot go to court and seek redress. It's very dangerous, because if we go that line, what we are going to do is that people will get to the point where they want to take the law into their own hands. I would rather have people go to court and lose their case than to have people make pronouncements that there's no point going to court.
I go to court because I want satisfaction and results. I have maybe 100 million Ghana cedis in these things. Per what is being captured in this document, it appears that even if I go to court and judge rules in my favor, what am I?
Look, let's take what a contract is, and then I'm not trying to go legalistic. A contract has certain principles for it to be able to become a contract, but no contract can be enforced if it's illegal, right? What if you went to court and a judge declared that that very clause you are talking about is void for illegality, as an example, notwithstanding that you entered into it? I'm not saying that is what will happen. The point I'm making is there's a public policy principle I want us to avoid. That public policy principle is a situation where anybody, it doesn't matter who, would deny the individual the ability to go to court and seek redress, even if he will lose. Give them that chance. Don't prevent people from going to. I have made an argument, or I've pointed in the direction of an economic right. Our constitution, under both the directive principle of state policy and throughout Article 20, draws attention to our economic rights and the right of a person's asset not to be expropriated. If, for example, you deny me my principal, I'm talking about principal, not interest. Essentially, are you not denying me of my right to my asset?
Yeah.
So it becomes a constitutional issue. As to whether you go to the Supreme Court for interpretation or whatever, that's another matter. I want to emphasize that no lawyer, or as a lawyer, I would never tell anybody that don't go to court. I'm not advising anybody go to court either. I'm more concerned about the first approach I've heard many people take. Don't go to court, you will lose, etc. Because it makes people frustrated. And the opposite of don't go to court, you will lose, is very dangerous for the society. I think we should avoid that. Both the public sector and the private sector should avoid that. Allow the individuals the right. The Constitution guarantees them to go to court for anything whatsoever. Let them go and leave the judges to decide.
Let's test the system.
Yeah. The other thing that, George, we seem not to have talked about, or we seem to be losing sight of, is the fact of what can also happen.
Yeah.
Because remember, I talked about the scenario where I think that we are in challenging times. Let us try our best to, for those of us who keep saying that our government should cut its expenditure, etc., let's try our best to keep saying that. Because
you think that should be the option going forward?
It's one of the many options, and I think the debt exchange, the suspension of external payments, etc., they are all part. But the cutting expenditure should be part, because I am cutting expenditure as a company, and every company in these times will cut expenditure, right? Cutting expenditure is very important because it's the expenditure that requires government to continue borrowing. And remember, the state must continue to survive. So at the moment, there are two main sources of income for government, which is obvious. One is taxes, which we will continue paying. Remember, the VAT is now gone to 15%, and they are levied, etc., which means that notwithstanding the challenges, I have to pay more. Two is T-bills, which have not been touched yet. But the T-bills is also borrowing. Because if I take treasury bill, I'm hoping that I'll get taxes and pay back. So every week there is an auction or whatever it is that, government keeps borrowing. If we don't take care, and we get to the point where the T-bills, and T-bills is still attractive. Yeah. If T-bills get to the point where interest on T-bills drop significantly and come to, I don't know whether it will ever get to single digit. I don't remember the percentage now, but it's double digit. But if we get to the point where T-bills become less attractive also, then suddenly government sources of earning pre-tax is going to be difficult. And then it will mean that government cannot spend, and we will have a lot of challenges. So we should pray against a worse scenario, which is why we must all cut expenditure.
And cutting that expenditure might help a lot in managing the situation right now, you think so?
And also making those who are angry feel that they see government is doing something. So,
could this expenditure thing being an alternative to this debt exchange program?
It's not an alternative, but it is a collateral action that government must take. So if you look at the budget and you see that the deficit that the government is going to use is still high, then you want government to see whether in these times you can make such drastic changes. You know, the pain for businesses, which is what your program is about, is when you see GRA always coming after its tax, and that means companies keep coughing up more. But then you think that public expenditure is increasing. And when you say government should cut expenditure, you are not necessarily referring to politicians. I think people mistake government. Anytime you make comment, they think you are referring to a particular political party. Government expenditure has always been high. I mean, I've said this. I mean, take Temaoyo refinery debt, which I keep talking about.
If I was a student in school.
Yes, if somebody mismanages Temaoyo refinery and you impose a levy on me, that is tax. And if I find out 15 years later that I'm still paying it, but Temaoyo refinery has still not been able to revamp, and that our raw oil is exported, and then we import oil, and then the dollar also goes up as a result of that because BDCs are complaining, etc. And the government of Ghana has to find, or Bank of Ghana have to find money for BDCs. And I'm like, what happened to the levy that we paid for Temaoyo refinery? And then you see that it has its backward linkages or forward linkages. These are the real issues we need to deal with. Once we politicize them and split it over NDC and PP, we lose sight of the real problems. Look, the problems of this country have been existing and they are fundamental. If we put everything aside and want to address them, we can. And if we don't, businesses will continue to suffer. And businesses will not be able to expand and employ the people and reduce the unemployment that we all desire.
Still on this debt exchange program, do you think that there could have been an alternative in trying to still contain our debts and have a good program with the IMF?
I think I said that earlier, and I want to emphasize that I don't call it an alternative. I think you solve crisis from multiple angles. And one of the angles, I definitely believe the debt exchange program, I think it's one of the angles. As to how it is structured is a different question. Whether it should be structured in such a way that individuals feel it, or also whether it affects confidence in the financial sector. If you ask me, apart from...
And that is what I want to...
And I'm coming to that. If you ask me, apart from the effect on individuals, I mean, I know very close friends and relatives who have essentially, based on collective investment scheme, mark-to-market alone, they've lost about 20% plus what was their principal as at the time this happened. And it's affected them drastically, right? So I think the individual component is the most painful one. But if I take that one aside and put that there, I think the lack of confidence in the financial sector is a very dangerous way that we are going. And it's not new. I've gone back on this in a previous presentation like this. Under the PNDC regime, if you had more than 50 CDs or something like that, you had a problem. People lost confidence in the financial sector, keeping monies at home, their mattresses, etc. Then, finally, after some 20 years or so, people get confidence. And then I make reference to the 2014, I think 2014, February. It was Valentine's Day, where we had some circular from Bank of Ghana where you basically could not hold dollar anymore, and a lot of people lost money. I lost money. We lost confidence. Then, just when we were about to regain it, the financial sector, a lot of Capital Bank, UT Bank, they all vanished, and we lose confidence again. Then you have the banking financial institution, then the likes of NAM1 and all. It's been going on. Then just when we think the confidence is being restored, we have debt exchange. I have seen people who have bought safes and trying to keep money away from banks. So if we have a situation where people go after the banks, run on the banks, or another bank collapses, or people refuse to now send money to banks and stop saving, or save in other non-cash instruments like buy property or send their money abroad by buying dollars, we will have killed confidence in the financial sector, and it will take a very long time to recover. Yeah. For a country which wants to improve savings culture. So I think we should look at this from, and that's what my worry is, George. My worry is that as a country, we seem to look at everything as finance and politics instead of economics. Yeah. An economist will tell you that this has a multiplier effect more than just simply being able to defer debt and pay my debt or being able to pay taxes. No, it has a wider multiplier effect, and it's about confidence that we have in the society.
And that's the fear that could happen. It could have impact even on government itself, raising revenue to fund its
once you
growth.
Kill confidence, you've killed everything. I mean, the World Bank and IMF have just predicted that there will be a recession next year by a third of the world's economy. Look, simply put, recession is lack of confidence. That's all it is. I'm telling you, that's all it is. If I'm not confident that I have this, the things are going to get better, I don't invest. And once I start disinvesting, the economy begins to contract. And that's what is called recession. I say we make simple things complex. But if I have confidence that the economy is going to get better, I go out there, okay, hi George Wiafe, let's create a new program at Joy FM. Let's do this. We are bullish. That's what they call bullish. Yeah. Then the economy grows. So the last thing you want to kill is confidence. Don't kill confidence in any sector. And the whole economy thrives on the financial sector. If confidence is killing the financial sector, it affects too many things. And I look at it from that angle.
It's PM Express Business Edition, and we'll be looking at how do you implement your business strategy in these challenging times. When we get back from the break, we're looking at the IMF, the Ghana cedi, the outlook, and also your Africa, the ball program that you do, if I got the name right.
That's Crystal Ball Africa.
Crystal Ball Africa, where you a lot of things you predict and they come to pass. We'll be getting more details on that one. This is PM Express Business Edition. Be right back after this break. Welcome back to PM Express Business Edition. As we look at the business strategy of those enterprises out there and how do they actualize it in the midst of economic uncertainty and the almighty debt exchange program. So Doctor, let's quickly look at the outlook and what are you seeing in terms of your strategy, and then talking about the Africa, I'm still messing up this name.
The Crystal Ball
Africa. Crystal Ball Africa in terms of outlook for the year.
So Crystal Ball Africa returns after COVID.
A long break.
Yeah. Well, we did a mid-year virtual edition last year, but we are doing a hybrid edition, part physical and part virtual, on February 2nd. So it returns gradually. Yeah, we hope to go full steam maybe the following year. But February 2nd, we are actually having Crystal Ball Africa. The outlook, as you know, we normally, after the session, we do the predictions at the end of the year. So we reserve the main predictions for February 2nd. So you
just a little teaser for us.
You'll be there. But if you look at it from the global outlook, of course, the recession have been predicted by IMF and the rest. My own view is that the recession will not be as bad as is being predicted. And the reason is very simple. I think the prediction was based on the fact that China was going to continue contracting. Yeah. But with China reopening and becoming more bullish, I think China will do better than had been earlier predicted. And there are certain sectors which are already going to revive as a result of China reopening. The travel sector is one of them. Travel and tourism sector is one of them. As of my last check yesterday, 32 airlines have asked to reopen their international routes to China as a result of China reopening, which means supply chain is going to get restored. Then the other interesting thing is, if you take Ghana, for example, Ghana is from April will become the UNESCO World Book Capital of the world. It's not something I've not heard.
Interesting.
I was expecting to see a lot in the budget about it. That's interesting. Since 2001, UNESCO declares one city in the world as the World Book Capital. And it's Ghana from April to the next 1 year. And I've not heard much about it. This can stimulate a lot of things in the publishing industry, in the book industry, in people who encourage reading, in companies which want to do corporate social responsibility, books and publishing. And other countries have used this to stimulate a lot of things. And that has gone a bit on the quiet. I think the Ghana Book Development Council has come up with a couple of policies, but they are more on the reading side than on the business aspect. So some of these things businesses can take advantage of. I expect quite a lot of tension in terms of individuals and versus government regarding the effect of the debt exchange and other things. But again, these are just initial. As the month progresses to an end, we will see how things shape up, especially after the debt exchange deadline passes.
I had a conversation, and just on this UNESCO thing, I had a conversation with Raja Khan, the head of research for
Standard.
And this was even a private conversation, but there was one thing she said, and said, George, you can quote me. Things are going to bounce back for this economy. And I'm just using the UNESCO thing as an example. Things are going to turn around, things are going to pick up, and these challenges will be over. I mean, is the outlook that bad for the economy? Because there are some who say that
I believe her, and I think they're bouncing back, quote and unquote, and I'm putting maybe after June. Between now and June, you could probably, when you have, the turbulence is not so much.
And so it's insisted that, Joe, you can quote me that things are going to get well.
You see, the turbulence is not going to be so much of the economy getting worse than the fact that people are angry about how the debt exchange program is being managed. And we should not confuse the two. And once you have people who are angry and it's not properly managed, it can have other multiplier effect. But in terms of stability, once you have IMF coming in, I expect some stability after June. Because remember, the program itself will go to the board in April. And after the board has approved it, and I expect it to be approved, I think the stability or some recovery will come after June.
You think the IMF program was good for businesses? Your thoughts on it? Good?
When it comes to the stringent part, no business actually will want to have an IMF program. But when it comes to the fact that it gives some sense of discipline to government's borrowing and to the economy, every business would love it, which is why some of us thought we should have gone much, much earlier. So I think in terms of predictability for businesses, it is good.
The bit about, so it's more of recovery and stability, that's what you want to put it, maybe after June.
I don't believe that businesses should be planning using government as a basis. The advantage why it is good for business is that it gives you certainty. When you have policy uncertainty, it disturbs your business plan and how you, once you have an IMF program, you can predict that, okay, the government is going to stick to a certain line, and that enables you make a prediction as to what you will do with your business. And that, to that extent, it is very good.
The IMF, it was good because of that fiscal discipline that it will bring to the economy, and that's why you think that it is a good thing.
Because essentially, if we are bankrupt, IMF is coming to just be a buffer for us, talk to our external creditors. See how the dollar immediately stabilized among other factors after the IMF announcement. So it makes it predictable for those who import a number of things. So I think it's good. But we shouldn't go there again. I mean, if we continue doing what we did before we get there, we'll be going, is it the 18th or the 19th time? I mean, there's no point going every time by doing the very thing which takes us there.
Ghana City, I mean, in terms of outlook and how businesses should strategize.
We are a city economy, we are not a dollar economy, even though many people think in dollars. I think that the city will depreciate again, but I don't think it is going to be at the same speed we saw that took it to 16 before it came down. Maybe gradually. I mean, as at now, that's how we see it. Yeah, that's how I see it.
That is despite an IMF program coming on board. Some are saying that when the program comes on board, we will see some fair stability compared to what
it went to 16, came down all the way to 7. And then my last check, it was between 9 and 12.
Yeah, you're right.
So you're talking about BOG and when you want to buy it in town. As at now, I don't see it going above 13, at least within the first half of the year. That's how I see it. And I call that stability. The speed with which it rose the last time was quite frightening. But I don't expect it to be descending back down to 7.
I see. Bank of Ghana, there's been issue about policy rates and all the rest. For you think that more action is needed by BOG to try and...
But that's a different matter. Policy rates is about how much you borrow. And I have always had a stance that policy rate is not a good way to manage inflation. I think we need to rethink that policy. That's a whole conversation on its own. I think the behavior of Ghanaians is such that managing inflation with policy rate just doesn't work. And I think you and I are living examples. There have been 5 increases. Inflation hasn't come down.
So, Doctor, your final words to businesses that some are thinking or even giving up. These are well-established firms. They've gone by the books, the practice, and all the rest, and they don't know what to do because of this perceived uncertainty.
My advice may be skewed by the way I think. I'm a perpetual optimist. I'm hardly ever pessimistic. Once in a while, every human being gets pessimistic when you see things and you go like, wow. But I'm a perpetual optimist. But optimism should not be empty. You can have an empty optimism which is based on no plan at all. And I think that is done a lot by politicians who will promise you, okay, let's have hope. And you can't see the plan based upon which they want you to be optimistic. So as a rule, I stop basing my optimism on government plans. If you take that out and then you begin to develop your own plan, devoid of what government is planning, and you, for example, identify new markets, which are people that I can still, tap into. Who are my clients that I still need to ensure that I protect? What are the needs I'm serving that they really will need? And remember, we are in a type of business environment where customers are not entirely loyal because there are alternatives. So you have to have a way of generating customer loyalty. If you put all this into account, at least you will have a constant flow of income and then you maintain the status quo. And if government policy leads to a better environment, then it's a windfall. So I will encourage businesses to remain very optimistic on the basis of their own plans, not on the basis of a government plan.
So, Doctor, I appreciate your time. A very tough, busy day for you, but you had time for us. A little bird told me that today is your wife's birthday, right?
It is, and you managed to drag me to this interview.
Yeah, and that's Mrs. Doctor, right?
Yes, Eunice. Yeah.
And you want to wish her happy birthday, right?
I want to wish her happy birthday, and you have to wish her happy birthday as well. Yes, for having dragged me into this. But I'll be going to see her from here.
I appreciate your time and a bit about the optimism that is what businesses might need in these challenging times. The strategy, the action, and how do you go about implementing it in the midst of debt exchange program and some economic uncertainty. Let's see how things will play out. We'll be looking forward to the Africa Ball Conference and the predictions. Crystal Ball Conference. I'll be looking up to the predictions, of course, because I'm interested in that. PM Express Business Edition. Have a great day.